Start us off.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is George Diaz. I'm with Georgia Strategy Group, and we have the pleasure of working with HPM and APS on this exciting initiative that we'll be looking forward for Atlanta Public Schools. Today, you'll be hearing from a number of key players in this initiative. As soon as Dr. Johnson and Dr. Bradshaw come on, we will let them address anybody here and just give opening remarks. And I don't think we have any school board members with us right now. But if we do, please just let me know, and we would love to acknowledge you. With that being said, today what we're going to be looking at is an overview of APS Forward 2040 initiative. And you'll be hearing from key stakeholders and learning how this process goes. The key thing we want everybody to know that this will be a process that we want everybody to be engaged in. And the process does have several layers, those that we will be sharing with you today, and in particularly in this video. So first, I'd like to play this video that can share. More of what you can expect.
Atlanta Public Schools is a large school district steeped in more than a century of history, culture, and achievement. For 153 years, APS has been serving students within the city of Atlanta through a caring culture of access, trust, and collaboration to build a future where every student will graduate ready for college, career, and life beyond school walls. What started as only 6 schools in 1872 has grown into more than 75 learning facilities for nearly 50,000 students in 2025 and produced graduates as illustrious and remarkable as the city it's in. Some of the world's most recognizable names have walked the halls as students of Atlanta Public Schools, from civil rights leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Charlene Hunter Galt, to business moguls like Chick-fil-A founder Truett Cathy and Coca-Cola president Harrison Jones, elected officials like U.S. Senator Johnny Isakson and Atlanta's first Black mayor, Maynard Holbrook Jackson, to entertainers like Gladys Knight and Andre 3000. The city of Atlanta has always made history with bold decisions, courageous leaders, and ideas that were ahead of its time. But what some don't realize is that Atlanta Public Schools has the same legacy. In 1969, Dr. Benjamin Mays, a towering figure in civil rights and education, was elected president of the Atlanta Board of Education. It was a time of fear, skepticism, and racial tension. Schools were just beginning to desegregate. People said, this isn't the right time. But Dr. Mays and the board did what they were elected to do. They put students first and made a bold, future-focused decision. They went all the way to California to bring in Dr. Alonzo Prim, the first Black superintendent in APS history. Today, more than 50 years later, APS is once again stepping into history with a long-range plan to reimagine our schools and campuses. With the help of the community and specialized experts at HPM, we will reshape the future of education for Atlanta Public Schools. Core Program Management, or HPM, is a construction program management company skilled at blending data and community input to create a plan for strategic growth over the next 10 to 15 years. This is not some group of out-of-towners coming in with an agenda to shake up what we know and love about APS, but rather a curated team of experts led by a former Georgia educator that will help us position the district to better serve our students. And because they're not builders, the HPM team has no vested interest in the outcome except for what matters to you. Think expanded programs, better facilities, improved engagement, and more personalized learning environments. That could mean more access to early learning, more community resources, or even schools designed to serve multiple neighborhood needs. For example, Despite Atlanta's prominence as a mecca of arts and entertainment, APS lacks a performing arts school. Let's fix that. Your children deserve better. They deserve more. So how will it work? On April 15th, 2025, the Atlanta Board of Education unanimously approved the contract with HPM at its public meeting. On May 5th, we published a State of Schools report that assesses the condition of each facility in the district. You can find it on the homepage of the APS website. This gives us valuable information about which buildings need improvements and how much it would cost. On May 8th, we held the first meeting of the Community Task Force because the most important part of this process is you. We are committed to transparency and involving the community every step of the way. To make sure every voice is heard, we're doing three things. First, we created the Community Task Force. It's made up of about 100 parents, staff, and community members from each attendance cluster. The Board of Education selected community representatives, while staff members were chosen from Go teams. Every school in the district is represented in this group. The task force will meet at least 4 times to share feedback with the leadership about what's going on in the district and provide critical perspective that will help guide the ultimate plan. The presentation from the first session is already available on the APS website. We'll also host at least 4 public meetings, inviting the community to speak, knowing the comments will be heard and weighed heavily when developing the final plan. If you can't make it in person, we'll offer virtual sessions when it works best for you and send out a community-wide survey so you can give us information about desired school size and programs you'd like to see. And finally, we've created a landing page on the APS website with information about every part of this process. Updates will be posted in real time. Remember, this is a customized plan based on your voice. Once we get the final feedback, the board will gather in June to go through it all. Over the rest of the summer, leaders at HPM will work with APS to develop options based on all the community feedback and data. Each new draft is presented to the task force and the community for review and modification. That process continues until a solid recommendation is formed and presented to the board in November for a first read. The goal is to have an approved plan by December 1st that will be implemented over the next 10 to 15 years. Operating too many facilities can stretch thin resources like teachers, maintenance, and food services. Operating too few facilities can have the same negative effect. A long-range facilities plan isn't just about bricks and mortar. It's about building stronger communities together. This process reaches far beyond school walls. By rethinking how we use APS properties, we open doors for early learning, affordable housing, even for APS staff, and economic development. These spaces can shape the workforce, uplift neighborhoods, and serve the common good. Because when we invest in schools the right way, with data, community voices, and shared vision leading the way, we're not just shaping classrooms, we're shaping the future of Atlanta. APS has shaped leaders, artists, athletes, and change makers. And just like before, Atlanta is ready to lead again. Forward thinking isn't new for the city. It's time we do it again. Join us in bringing APS forward and reshaping the future of education.
And before we toss it over to Tracy, one last thing we wanted to bring everybody's attention to, and bear with me as I pull up this graphic. We definitely want to make sure that the community is engaged and that folks share with us their thoughts. If I can Here are the dates of the next upcoming meetings, and one will be coming up tonight, this evening at 6 p.m. We will be having that in person. We hope that you can join us. We will also like to bring attention to at least the next 3 meetings that you will be seeing, and each of those will also be in person and virtual options as well. And please make sure that you note the landing page, Atlanta Public Schools .us/APS 2040. Over there, you'll have the latest updates and all of the information that you see here. The meeting today, along with the meeting tonight, will all be captured and be kept for record. We will also be posting these on the Atlanta Public Schools YouTube page within about 20 to 48 hours after the meetings. So please make sure that if you can't make it or you miss it, you'll be able to gather all the information there. With that being said, I know that we have a hand raise and some comments, but I'll toss it over to Tracy and we will do the Q&A portion and hear comments after him. Tracy?
Okay, thanks, George. Well, thank you everybody for attending today. I'm going to show you a PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to go off camera. I just feel like it doesn't make the presentation as glitchy for you all. But I want to share with you how this process is going to work from the perspective of how we are going to approach long-range facilities planning. And let me get going here. Kavi, can you help me if that is present on the screen? You're muted, sorry.
Yeah, we can see it.
Yes,
Okay.
we can see.
Okay, good. All right. So what the agenda will look like today is that we're going to talk about the purpose and the process of this facilities plan, this comprehensive facilities plan. I'll share with you some information about the State of the Schools report, the background data in there, and then the real primary purpose of today's meeting is to talk about planning framework. I think that in this comprehensive planning process, it is really, really important to establish up front kind of what we call the rules of planning, that are driven both in data sources that allow us to see what's going on in the district from a facilities, enrollment, demographic, all those kind of data points, but also from a community perspective and helping shape the rules for planning. And so we're going to talk about that, talk a little bit about the questionnaire and the survey that is out for the community, and they'll have a link for that, and then talk about some next steps. So the first thing is to really address that any long-range comprehensive plan needs to align to the district strategic plan. And so APS has been going through a rigorous effort to build with the community a strategic plan. Again, setting goals for 2030 and beyond that really are, and again, continue to develop kind of those goals and benchmarks for the district. Now, how this impacts the facilities plan is that making sure that this is just one piece of it, that the system is efficient and effective. Students have the schools and resources they need to succeed. And I think this is the primary drive of a facilities plan. I like to think that a facilities plan is very little about facilities, but everything that makes facilities work. School facilities are just one resources of teaching and learning, but they're very important pieces to teaching and learning. And they're not inexpensive. And so we want to make sure that, leveraging good data, good community feedback, good framework, good, community strategies around how we use facilities looking forward for a variety of reasons for education and how they serve the community. And so this is just one piece of the comprehensive plan that will be impacting the strategic plan for the district. When we think about comprehensive planning, the analogy I like to use is a four-legged stool analogy. And what I mean by that is that if you can imagine the facilities kind of sit on the top, and it's a seat, that it is supported by what we believe are four primary functions that allow the bench to be stable for us. And so when I look at it, I think that, and I'm going to talk about each of these as we go through this, the demographics and enrollment are one leg to the stool. Of course, these are talking about certainly enrollment projections, but it goes beyond that. It really goes beyond, who we're serving and where we're serving students. And so this goes into a lot. You're going to see today some higher level numbers of the projections of enrollment, looking back historically at enrollment. But as we get deeper into this process, we really do look at, where students are being served in their programs, what types of programs, and how those programs are being met, and those students are being met in the facility side. The condition of facilities is really important to us too. Obviously, the physical condition about buildings. We like to think that buildings at its least level should be what we kind of dub a, warm or cool, safe, and dry building, right? But we want them to be beyond that. We also believe that the condition of a facility is how it reacts to the programs and all of the things that from teaching and learning that serve the students. And we believe there's two components to the condition piece. What I believe is a cornerstone, and what we're talking about today is the educational framework, and what the educational framework means to how this district operates and will operate in the future. This is everything from school size to how you deliver early childhood or multilingual services or career and technical education or special education, fine arts, athletics. This is the real core of how facilities should be formed in the future. And finally, that final leg of the stool is the funding piece. Now, I don't think funding is the primary thing. I think that everything we do kind of informs the funding that is needed. But imagine that four-legged stool kind of under the microscope of that community transparency, that community engagement that we want. And so the facilities and community kind of sit on that. And if you can imagine that if one of those legs of the stools gets ignored, that stool becomes wobbly and then facilities will never become stable. And so we believe that we have to address it from that perspective. So this is really setting the short and long-term vision for Atlanta Public Schools, focused on identifying those future facility needs and aligning to the strategic plan. What this is not, it is not the ESPLOS planning. And I think this is something that we have to address early in this process, that a comprehensive facilities plan should inform the ESPLOS. And when the district goes for their next ESPLOS vote, that this comprehensive plan is an information source to allow to the guidance of that ESPLOS program. I do think that the ESPLOS has been such a wonderful thing for the state of Georgia. But on the other side, what it has done is it has kind of allowed districts to just kind of reserve their planning to just the ESPLOS and facilities, where we believe it has to be more than just ESPLOS planning. And so I just want to make that pretty clear right up front. Now, the purpose of this meeting is to really describe that process, and to review all the data. But it really is a framework focus, thinking about our programs and our curriculum and the operations piece of this district, and trying to figure out what the rules behind that are. So the process goes in a discovery phase, which we have been in for several months now, what we're going to call the state of the schools, and you'll see that in a minute. But the state of the schools perspective, the discovery is really about discovering everything we just talked about. We have to validate that information too. I really think it's important to talk about data in an open way. What I don't want this process to do is to let us just tell you what data says. I think data can be interpreted a lot of ways, and I think that we should be able to get the community perspective about what that data means to them, and how we explain that data is very important, and sometimes showing kind of what the shortfalls and the benefits of the data can be. And so that validation piece is really, really important for us. It goes into a planning phase where we engage the community and continue to engage the task force, and how we look at this district moving forward, and what we call maybe options or scenarios moving forward. And there's different pathways to figure out your 10 or 15-year plan, understanding that the plan will change over that 10 or 15 years. But it has to allow for the change to be kind of adaptable to those new demographics and new conditions that may not be foreseeable right now, but we can do some pretty good predictors of right now. That will eventually lead to a facilities plan that eventually, hopefully, could lead to another SPLOS program. So the community outreach piece to this is we want to make this as inclusive as we can. We wish everybody could be at every meeting, but we know that's just not possible. So we're trying to include as many opportunities as we can. Obviously, a community task force of about 100 citizens of this community, from the Go Team representative, board identified representation on this, but their role is really to do the process oversight, to make sure that we as the facilitators of this process are making sure that we get the information out, that the information is being vetted and reviewed, that they're helping us develop some of those pathways based on their community needs and opportunities that are out there, and become kind of a role of communication for us also. The public meetings are really intended to get some feedback on when we come up with those ideas, but this first one is really about getting our feedback about getting the rules together. And so this is really important that people are engaged in this. I think this first part is actually the critical part. As we get to more scenarios and recommendations, certainly that input's helpful to us, and we're going to use that information. But this piece really helps guide us to make the good decisions that are both balanced in data and community insight. And certainly constant board updates. So we were in public meetings constantly through this process to make sure the board is informed. But not only the board is informed, but this also is another outlet for community outreach where the community can see process updates and data updates. So the state of the schools is really a piece of information that's really, really important, and it is on. There's a link here. There's a QR code that you could go to, but it's also on the district website. But it is a snapshot of current APS data that's out there. It's a central source of data planning. It includes things like demographics and facilities data and program information. Now, understand, it is a living document. It is a document that will continuously be updated as the community provides more input for us, as a task force wants to see more information in it, so it can be translated out to the community. And we'll make sure that it's always transmitted out to the community when this gets updated. So another good, for instance, is that come fall, we're going to have to update the demographic information in there, because we'll have new student data next year, and we'll have new utilization data and even some new program data as the district continues to evolve. The district doesn't sit still because we're doing a plan. So this document has to make sure that it continuously gets updated to make sure we're keeping up with the planning process. So some of the background data in here, one of the things obviously we look at is campus age, and not only campus age doesn't just inform condition, but campus age can also inform the types of buildings that serve our students. As you look at the generation of buildings for the last 100 years, you can see there's certainly different eras of buildings that had different purposes, all the way from the 1920s and 30s, and those kind of recession and depression era buildings, but moving into the 50s where schools are built very rapidly, and so they weren't very flexible, and they weren't made of the best materials, and so they had shorter lifespans. But then you got into the 70s, and they were more open concepts, as maybe some of you went to some of those. But even in the 90s and early 2000s, when we got to more pod concepts and things like that, you can see how the age of building can affect how we deliver education. And so what we want to make sure is that we're updating facilities to kind of be timeless as best we can. But they will have an impact. This age will have an impact on how we look at buildings too. But it doesn't mean that older buildings are closed down either. That's a really important piece. Some of these older buildings have really great legacy and have really great program adaptability in them that we're going to find beneficial to this plan. So as we look at demographics also and projecting enrollment, one of the things we want to make clear is that the projections that we conduct in this are based on where students live, not necessarily where they attend. Now, I'm going to show you a piece of information here in a few minutes about what we call live attend analysis, so we can do analytics on how students move in this district from boundary to school, or outside of boundary and into a school. But the projections, the reason we based on student residence is because it gives us a real idea about where students are and where they live and where they have lived, and trying to give us some of that information. We geocode students back as far as we can track them, and it's based on official student data that we get from APS in the state of Georgia. We do what we call survival ratios or progression ratios that show grade to grade progression and that inform future projections. We do look at housing development and permits. We know that the mayor has an aggressive plan, for the 2030 for affordable housing in this city, and that's going to be important as we look forward in looking at our enrollment. But we also know that there's some declining birth rates out there can help offset that. And so that birth data is really important for us to help, look at kindergarten forecast, which kind of sets a baseline for future enrollment projections as we go across all days. And so, historically, when you look at the district, you can see that there has been some historic decline out there. And we do project also because even with increased some housing, we're not seeing the birth data really, we're seeing the rapid decline in birth data really impact the entry point of kindergarten for public schools. And again, I don't think this is something that APS is alone in. Like most districts, I work on a national level, and most districts that I deal with today are dealing with these lower entry points of kindergarten and first grade due to those severe declining birth rates we've seen across the country in the last several years. And so, but I always also talk about looking out for the projections. When we look out at projections, I kind of think that, and I've been after 25 years of looking at this, we do 10-year projections, but really that 5-year projection gives us the most reliability. And the reason for that is because we have solid birth data, we have solid program data, we have solid enrollment data where it has been in the last 5 years. And when you get beyond that, you're starting to project like housing units, and you're starting to project births that can have changes beyond demographic control. And so we want to make sure that we're really paying attention in a year by year, and again, always updating the projection. And again, while the district trend is downward, there are still some areas that are projected to grow, as you saw in the last slide. So this is kind of looking at all students, and I'm going to kind of look at this from an all student perspective, and then one that doesn't include charter students. But one of the important things about these charts is to kind of track this, what kindergarten would be 0 and grade 1. And you can see that from the all students perspective, just 9 or 10 short years ago, this district had almost 4,800 students entering into the kindergarten. And you can see that in 2024-25, that number decreased by nearly 1,000 students, 3,721. And again, that's going to have an impact how students move through the district. Now you can see on this one, the red indicates kind of the higher enrollments, and the blues indicate some of those lower enrollments. And what you're going to see is trends in these. As you can see going across in a diagonal, you can see the trends for demographics. Now, if I look at without charter, once again, that just 10 years ago, where we were almost at just below 4,000 students at kindergarten in 2016, 2017, where you see now we're below 3,000. And again, what this means is that even with some uptick in birth data and even housing data, and this includes all the housing that's occurred in the last 5 years, and it's including projected housing and the projected births out there. So when you're looking at this information, it's that projection can only indicate that the district will tend, and I'm going to go to the all students, but I'll go to the without charter. You can see that there's still going to be a trend that goes downward. And the reason for that is that we have these smaller enrollments that are replacing those bigger enrollments that just occurred 8 to 10 years ago and pushing through the system. And so we're going to obviously keep an eye on this, and we keep an eye on it specifically in the clusters and the neighborhoods to make sure that we're accurately projecting, where students are going to, that we can predict that will be in the city. So capacity also is something that is, and I believe this capacity is one of the most maybe debated topics in school planning. And maybe the reason for it is that there are so many different ways to figure capacity. And again, working across this country, most districts have their own way of looking at that. What we have decided to use is the instructional unit allocations based on Georgia Education's guidelines. We think that this has acted as a steady number over the years that allows us to look at how many students a building can hold. Now, what I also want everybody to know is that we believe that capacity can be fluid. The capacity of a building can be fluid. And even though the Georgia Instructional Units tells us that, the Georgia Instructional Units gives us a low, medium, and high range. And the reason for that is because programs can affect how much the capacity is. So for instance, the real simple one that we always use, an example we always use is that, 1 year a classroom might be a general classroom, and let's just say that its class size is 22 or 23. Well, the next year that classroom may have to be used as a special education unit. Now that would mean that the capacity of that room went from 22 or 23 down to 10 or 12, which would impact the total capacity of the building. And so we see variations based on programs and how programs move in a district to adapt to the student needs out there. And so always knowing that there's going to be some range that a building can hold is where we're trying to go. And so we target that mid-range, but we also know there's some flexibility in that. And as we start to develop options and start to develop recommendations, we are going to take a real specific look at these capacity numbers to make sure that programmatically these buildings will be able to handle the student enrollment that we project going into them. So as you look across the district in this sense, that the utilization of facilities, the utilization being, the number of students divided by the capacity, you can see the number of seats that are available in the district. Now, while developing this, again, the utilization will, on a school by school basis, will become more and more important. Now, one thing I want to share with you on utilization is this, is that I think when we think about the size of buildings and what size buildings should be and how many students should be in buildings, utilization can be less and less of a factor. If we think that a building has enough students in it to programmatically have all the programs it needs, but its capacity is way beyond that, maybe utilization doesn't matter. But on the other hand, if I have 10 schools where I have so much capacity beyond my student population, that's when the district needs have to be addressed. Again, what happens here is that if you look at 20,000 empty seats across the district still maintains these seats. They cool them, they heat them, they clean them, they light them. They all the things that have to function to make a building still operate. And so part of a plan should look at kind of the operational efficiency from the number of seats and facilities that you have in a district. And again, in some areas, it may mean less, it some mean more in other areas, but it's trying to balance that. And sometimes it's a matter of how do you maybe programmatically fix it or fix it through boundaries instead of looking at, right sizing of a district. When I talked about the live attend analysis, I'm going to show you 3 charts, but I'm going to really just pay attention to the high schools because it's kind of easy to read. What a live attend analysis does is it tells you how many students live in a boundary and how many students attend a school in that boundary or where they attend. I'm going to go across on the Douglas, which is the second white line down on Douglas High School. And if you move across, the way this reads is that these are the students that actually there are 1,746 students that live in the Douglas High School boundary. These are K-12 students that we have identified, that are geocoded in the system, that are recorded in. And what you can see is that of those students, that 1,250 of the 1,746 actually live and attend in the boundary. 117 students actually leave the boundary and go to another a clustered or boundary high school. And then 379 attend a charter or a specialty program school, which means about 28.5% of students actually leave the boundary to find a program. But if I follow it down, I can see that there are 46 students that actually transfer into the boundary, and you can see which schools they're transferring in from. Now, what I want to say about the live attend analysis is that this isn't necessary to put a judgment on a building or why students move back and forth. This is really to help us kind of get some indicators as to cues of our students seeking programs. Are programs not available to them? And can we, in a facilities plan, can we assist in making sure that students have more access to their programs? And so I think this is an indicator, but this is an also indicator, and I'll show you the middle school, not the elementary school, just that, there's all kinds of reasons why students transfer across boundaries. One reason we point to that's kind of an easy one, at the elementary grade level, maybe a teacher teaches at a building that they don't live in that boundary, and they have a student in elementary school that simply just goes to school with them. And I think that is another reason students might transfer across boundaries. And again, so we don't really put a judgment on this number, but we really do try to look at it from a more analysis standpoint, from a projection standpoint, and from an accessibility to program standpoint. And so this can be found in the State of the Schools report in the appendix. And you can see that I'm not going to leave the elementary up too long because it is kind of blinding on a slide, but it shows you every elementary school also as you go across. Now, a facilities condition assessment, the next leg of the stool is really the condition of the building. The district does go through an analysis on a 5-year cycle to update facility condition information based on all the East Lost work that the voters have approved in. And so right now, then the deferred maintenance, Atlanta Public Schools has a deferred maintenance of about $672 million. Now, it is a big number, but across the board, it is a pretty, that means the buildings are in decent shape, even though the numbers. Just remember that there are a lot of facilities out there and a lot of square footage. Now, what we mean by deferred maintenance, if these are things that have either maybe are still in operations, even though they may have crossed over their expired life expectancy. So sometimes if a roof has 20 years, the roof still might be 22 years, but it's still a good roof on the building. And what this does, it gives us some indicators to how we plan to fix things out there for the district. Now, there are strategies to maintain an appropriate deferred maintenance level. Again, this number will never be zero. There's always going to be needs out there because there's not enough money to go around. But the things for that are you could increase funding. This is dependent on the operational budgeting for the East Lost funding. So would you direct more towards some of these for some more deferred maintenance instead of new constructions or renovations? The other thing you could do is replace or comprehensively renovate older facilities. And certainly the last one is decrease the number of facilities that you have to operate. That is another way to maintain or to lower that need for condition improvement across the district. And so we use what we call, there's an FCI, Facility Condition Index, which is really a repair versus replacement cost. And the scoring of it is which is a standard measurement of how we look at this. Basically, it's the last kind of two bullets that you have to look in here. The facility condition assessment score is the inverse of the total FCI, which means that 100 would be the best score and 0 would be the worst score. And so a building that is closer to 100 is going to be in better condition. And so when you start to look at charts across the board, and I'm going to come back to the other slide, when you come across, well, let me hit this really quick, that this will help us actually look at renovation replacement standards, things like health safety and changing programmatic demands. Historic significance. One of the things that Atlanta Public Schools pays very close attention to is historic preservation, and what those buildings mean to communities, and considering that community significance and the legacy and the history of Atlanta all come into play when making decisions about facilities. So these will come into play, and so all of that comes into play to get these kind of summary, and you can see that in this chart. Schools that have these higher FCA scores, and they tend to be newer schools or schools that have been impacted by recent East Lost programs. But as you go across, you can see that, the scores vary across the district, and you can see kind of the repair cost by building. Now, the one thing and we have elementary and middle and then high schools on here also. Now, what I want again, when you're looking at data, some of the things that we need to pay attention to is that it's not as easy as just adding up the 3 repair costs from elementary, middle, and high school and say, oh, we need that much money to fix our schools. It really doesn't go that way. The reason for that is because the facilities planning of a facility is really the total cost. So a building may require that maybe you have an addition on the building, or because of capacity needs, or maybe that you have to take down part of the building and replace it because it's in poor condition. And so, or another example I give is that maybe in the repair cost that there are the lighting needs replaced in a building. So replacing lighting into more LED and modern day fixtures. But I've got ceiling tiles in there too that might be new, that might not have expired. But I'm not going to put old ceiling tiles up with new lighting, and so we might have to replace a ceiling tile, and that number might not be reflected in the repair cost. But what it does is the repair cost gives us an indicator of the level of action that we need to take from a condition standpoint of a facility. And so just by adding the numbers gives us an indicator, and just one indicator of kind of the disposition of the facility. Now, the framework, which is the most important piece to this, I believe is a cornerstone of planning. We talk about framework. We use this example a lot because I think this is really important. I think that when we're talking about, real framework things that matter to people, one thing that we talk about is, how do you get to the right school size with the right amount of programs, with the right amount of operating costs? And so, I mean, I think ideally people would like smaller school sizes in some cases. I mean, I think there's high school people that want bigger high schools for programs. But I think that we want manageable school size and we want to have really diverse and robust program offerings and we want good operational costs. Now, when you get into the cycle like this, I think what's important, and this is what makes every school district unique, is that you get into this integrated planning model that if you want those low operating costs with robust program offerings, it's difficult to have smaller school enrollments. It takes what we call full-time equivalency enrollment in a building to get the full program need that you have. If a district wants robust programs and small school sizes, it's going to be difficult to have lower operating costs. And so it becomes a very expensive program to run. And then which is becoming more and more obvious as we look into how small school supplements are going to be kind of generated in the future, or if they're even going to be available as budgets get tighter and we start to look into more of our reserve funds to supplement smaller program schools. And then finally, if a district wants smaller schools and low operating costs, it's going to be difficult to offer the programs that are really necessary for student success in a district. Now, what's a trick to this plan, and I believe this to my core, is that it is up to APS in Atlanta and its communities to shape the triangle. It's not up to anybody else around you, not Fulton County, DeKalb County. It's not up to anybody around you. It is APS's goal to figure out what this triangle looks like for Atlanta public schools and what the balance of this triangle looks like. And I think this is going to be a really important piece to what we're going to be doing in this planning process. So school size becomes a very big component of this. Again, when you're thinking about, I don't necessarily always think of school size as a number, even though you might see some numbers in here, but sometimes we try to get the enrollment to how do we get full programs in our buildings. And I just don't mean like arts and athletics and those things. I mean core education classes also. How do we get it so we're programmatically strong in every building in our district? And that there's equitable kind of delivery models across the district. Look, it is a very different delivery model when you talk about school size from a 250 student enrolled building to an 800 student enrolled building. And so some consistency across that would help with staffing, would help with programming, would help with equitable program delivery models for the entire district. And so when looking at those elementary and K-8s, the enrollment goal that we look for is that the district would like to look at 4 to 6 teachers level per grade per unit, so per cohort, which means a first grade would have 4 elementary teachers and a second grade would have 4, a third grade, just so on and so forth. Again, now, if you look at that, that would probably mean at the current school size or class size offering, those buildings would come in somewhere between 450 and 600 enrolled buildings. Now, keeping in mind that 30 of the 49 have fewer than 500 students in them, but 40 of the 49 can also hold 500. Now, again, what this tells us is that this would be the goal from a programmatic standpoint at the elementary grade level. Now, it doesn't mean that if a school doesn't have this number of students in it, that, oh my gosh, that's a student that's a school that could be targeted for closure. That's not the case necessarily. And mostly because a lot of the schools can actually hold the enrollment that we need. But we just need to make sure they're configured in the right way and serving the right communities and kind of getting past those historic ways that districts have drawn boundaries, but really programmatically and community driven programs in these buildings. Our middle school targets do kind of target a bigger number, and the reason for that, this range from 750 to 1500, is really to get to fully funded programs, understanding that that the feeder patterns for middle schools link directly to high schools, and we don't want to break up those geographic feeder patterns, but it is very difficult when we have those lower enrolled middle schools to programmatically have articulation through our school district. Which means, how do we get, good fine arts through our middle schools to our high schools that links together, or special education or multilingual services or athletics. Those are really, really important. Currently, there are 3 schools that enroll 240 to 450. Programmatically very difficult to offer an equitable and fully strong program for middle schools that are of that size. There are 3 that are over 750. So you can imagine there is a big difference in the 2. But remember, all the schools can hold 750 plus. So again, it's really strategically looking at the buildings to make sure that, much like at the high school, that, the goals at the high school are really more about balancing resources and program offerings. Sometimes, the school size at a high school is really dependent on kind of that geographic feeder pattern. But it's really about being programmatically rich too, that attracts students to those high schools. And again, part of that you have to pay attention to is kind of that geographic and program continuity that this district strives to. Maximizing staff resources. So you can see that, when schools have under 450 or under 600 or less than 1,000 at the high school, these are kind of the staff offerings. And you can see that it's very limited when it comes to funding a school building from the state of Georgia standpoint. When I can go to my next slide and show that, and I'll kind of toggle back and forth, but if I go to 450 plus, you can see how many more resources at the middle school or the elementary school, and over 700 and over 1,500 at the high school. And again, sometimes it's not a matter of that we want to get all buildings to this, because there might be things that get in our way of it. But it's really important to make sure that we're fully staffing these buildings in an equitable manner to get good equitable programs out there without kind of breaking the bank from an operational standpoint. And so really the size of schools is really kind of dependent more on that, what you can offer students, not necessarily how many students are in the door. And again, it doesn't mean that a high school under 1,000 isn't a high school that can't exist. We just need to make sure that it has those program offerings that gives every student success, and balancing and getting good resources in those buildings. So the programmatic framework will also address things like early childhood, CTAE, and multilingual and signature programs in fine arts and athletics. We think these are important to the district, and these will all be addressed in this plan. So again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these slides, but these are in your State of the Schools report. I've show you where programs are for exceptional education, shows you where, again, kind of from a programmatic standpoint, we can see from a CTAE standpoint, I think these are some fascinating figures about, where the district wants to go from a career in technical and agriculture experience for the students. You can see how many pathways are out there, and we want to start to expand some of those pathways, especially down to middle grade, so students can explore different avenues as they walk into high school. But you can see that 50 of the APS valedictorian salutatorians and star students were CTA students in the last 5 years. I mean, the CTAE, as many of you know, isn't a thing of the past. It is a thing of moving forward. And so our real focus in this is to really, how do we promote a strong CTAE program through this facilities plan? And once again, here's some information about where those programs are located at the high schools. Again, this is in your State of the Schools report. And then also some of the programs in your middle schools. Again, continued emphasis on trying to get more exploratory into the middle schools so they can see the pathways for them and CTAE. Charter schools matter. I mean, in a district like this where they come into play. And I think one thing that we have to pay attention to is that there are charters that are on probationary status when it comes to, and you can see that they're starred in here. Now, what that could mean is up to 3,500 students that may have to return back into the APS, what we might call the APS facilities portfolio, and how does that impact planning? And that is a kind of, well, what's going to happen? Well, again, it really depends on that probationary status until 2027 when that is decided. That is not a decision of the facilities plan. That is a decision of the probationary status. And I want to make that very clear. And so, but we have to make sure that there are pathways if that does happen, that we're not making decisions about buildings that these can most impact in the district if this does happen or if it doesn't happen. And so we have to have those pathways that allow us to be flexible toward that. The operational framework, we talk a lot about portfolio right sizing. Right sizing really means how many facilities you do need to handle your enrollment in the programs out there in the future. I don't want, and again, I think one of the big fears, and rightfully so, is that I think one of the montages getting out there is that this is a consolidation program. It really isn't. I mean, it's really about how we get the buildings in the right places in the right neighborhoods, that we protect legacies in neighborhoods, and how do we protect that student enrollment and give them the programs they need. Will it require some reduction of facilities? Obviously it could. But on the other side, it could demand that we're going to have more facilities in places where they are needed in the future too. And so it's a balance of how these facilities will look in the future. Again, the thresholds that we should look at are that capacity enrollment that we have out there. How do we get the right condition of facilities within the affordable price range, that buildings do not become so unaffordable for us? How will geography and impacts on feeder patterns really impact how we make good decisions? What is the district-wide utilization of facilities, and are we maintaining the right amount of facilities for the future? And again, even though it's last, and it's only last because it has the most emphasis, programmatic impacts. How do these buildings impact the programs, both from a geography, access to the neighborhood school, but also access to regional programs and good articulation through the schools that your students walk through. The operational kind of framework, again, these are things from the operational side. How do we balance declining enrollment out there? Can we look at things like boundary adjustments or feeder adjustments, program adjustments? Can we look at consolidation where necessary? How do we look at the condition of facilities, and where do we put our priorities? Do they get prioritized in deferred maintenance and renovations, in some new constructions, or in consolidation and closure? And then finally, when we're looking at those renovation replacement standards, what are those things that really come into play for prioritizing how we renovate or replace facilities in the future? These are all important framework questions that are necessary to making good facility decisions as we move forward. And so finally, the questionnaire. Here you see that there is a link on here that you can go to, and the questionnaire should be live for you. And you can take the link on your phone. There is a version of Spanish available for you if you choose that direction, and there's an English version also. And what I would suggest is that when you take the survey, I would take some time to look at the state of the schools, look at some of that data out there. But this provides a lot of opportunity for feedback for us that actually gets memorialized, that gets reported, that gets summarized for the board to see all of the comments and all the feedback that we get. These questions are things like prioritizing the purpose of this plan. What do you think the priorities of this plan should be? It will talk about school size and program delivery impacts based on those school sizes. That is going to be a key component of how we deliver this. It's going to talk about early childhood and fine arts, and mostly accessibilities and models for that. Early childhood talks about pre-K programs, that the district is committed to this universal delivery of pre-K, but how do you deliver pre-K? Do you want it in every elementary school? Should we have more regional programs for it? Should we have more specialized programs for pre-Ks? Those are the things that we're looking for. The fine arts obviously go along with extracurricular, and so how do we address those extracurricular needs that are out there? Fine arts will also include, you might see that kind of the district desire for a performing arts center, that the rich history of entertainers that come out of this district. And not only that, but the growing legacy of the entertainment that Georgia is starting to provide for the world has become part of the big industry here. And so is it necessary to have something like that in APS? Addressing multilingual services as the district becomes more and more diverse, and we see people from many different backgrounds entering into the district, continuing to enter into the district, and really celebrating that diversity that Atlanta Public School has. Career and technical is a big part of this. How do we address boundaries in school feeders? And then again, some strategies for renovation versus replacement of future facilities. So with that, and I'll leave this survey link up for you, that these are the foundations for this facilities plan. We hope that you continue to stay engaged in this. Again, all the meetings are posted on there, and so when you see the availability of a meeting, if you wanted to attend. Now, task force meetings, again, we believe are open to the public. Task force members are the one that participate, but you can observe if you feel that you want to come and observe the task force. We welcome that. This is a very transparent process. We don't have anything to hide. We want as much engagement as we can get. So again, I'm going to thank you for your time. I'm going to come out of this really quickly and allow George to kind of lead the questions. Thanks again.
Thanks, Tracy. While you're stopping sharing your screen, I'm going to share mine, and I'm just going to place this on here so we can all see right now. These are currently the meetings that are scheduled. We'll be putting the locations, we're coordinating as far as the locations and everything, but you can go ahead and place these dates on your calendar and these times. There will also be virtual options for each of these meetings, and all of this information again will be always on that atlantapublicsschools.us/APS 2040. I'm going to leave that flyer up there for a second, just so everybody can have it, and also reiterate that tonight at 6 p.m., We will also have an in-person meeting. It will be exactly like the one that you're experiencing right now virtually, with the only option that you'll be able to make your comments in person. One of the things that I wanted to reiterate from the presentation that Tracy shared is, first of all, like, nothing is set in stone. And I'm sorry to be so conversational, but I just wanted to be clear right now. Nothing is set in stone. This process that we're going through right now is the very first step to start helping the school system and the players identify how to move forward with this process. But this is a process that will be built collectively. The other thing that I wanted to share here is that the benefits will be multifaceted and for the students. And here's what I mean about multifaceted for the students. If you didn't catch this in Tracy's presentation, one thing to keep in mind is that early childhood education. That's one of the things that will be a focus in this initiative, along with, of course, classroom sizes and programming for students. And then you also heard a mention of workforce housing or affordable housing, which has definitely been a dilemma that a lot of us in Atlanta can relate to. I am getting close to stopping the sharing portion of the screen for this flyer, but I am going to go back to the questions. And what I'm going to do is, first, we'll go to the Q&A feature, and we'll start with all the questions that have been asked and that have already been given answers. Then after that Q&A feature, we'll go to any question that is still in that Q&A feature that has not been answered yet, but it looks like a lot of them have. And then we'll move into the general chat of the Zoom, where all the comments and questions were just put in there. And we're going to read every single one of these. I will also read out the names. That way we can just have those reflected for the record. So now what I'll start doing is I'll stop sharing this screen. And I'm going to go back in here and let me open up bear with me as I open up the Q&A portion. So we have had 16 questions. It looks like 15 have been answered. I'm going to share my screen again. Let me see if it'll even let me do this. Yes. All right. I'm sharing my desktop. That way you guys can see that I'm looking straight at the Q&A feature. And Miss Tiffany Franklin, I'm not going to X this out yet. I will come to you at the end. Let's go through all of these first, though. So will this session be recorded and made available to the public? Yes, it will be. You can see right there the link that I believe is to the YouTube page, and all of the videos. For example, this video right now that's being recorded, the Zoom, the meeting tonight at 6 p.m. And the video that you watched at the beginning of this presentation will all be placed on the YouTube page for Atlanta Public Schools within no more than 48 hours. Between 24 and 48 hours, you'll have all this. The next question from Miss Lisa Olmstead. I have questions about the communication and task force. Number one, task force. Are all charter, partner, and traditional schools represented? And I'll go to the first answer on that. All schools with attendance boundaries / zones are included. Traditional partner plus additional community representatives. Ms. Lisa Olmstead's second question is also regarding the task force. Is there accountability for members in communicating these sessions to ensure all school communities are made aware of the sessions? We will work district-wide to make sure people are aware of the public sessions, but we will also make sure the task force members are sharing information back and forth. Her third comment regarding the task force: will members be listed on the website? I noticed on the presentations that members are intended to be community resources, and we'd like to know how to reach out if we'd like to have community sessions. And on that note, they are listed on the webpage, and I will go to that landing page here towards the end. Yes, you'll be able to see all that, and you can click on the people icon on the three persons right there, and that will take you directly to that landing page. And then four.
Excuse me, George. Or Jorge.
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure if you're sharing your the screen that you're, because we,
I'm looking at the Q&A feature.
yeah, that's not what's showing right now.
Okay. Hold on. Let me all right. Is you see my desktop and you're seeing the flyer, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Does it, I guess it won't let me show it because I have it on full screen. So if it's not letting me show it, what I'm going to do is I'll just leave the flyer up.
George, I don't mind showing it if I can.
Okay, yeah, if it allow you to show it, I just don't know if it will. But either way, if you're following along with the Q&A portion, yeah, if you're following along with the Q&A portion feature, you'll see that I'm going through each of these questions. Hopefully I'm not sharing my screen anymore. I don't think I am.
I think Tracy is.
I am. It's up.
Okay, cool. And then yes, can these sessions be communicated to all APS stakeholders through infinite campus message? And yes, was the answer from Travis. Now we're on the Elaine Hudson question. How were task force members chosen? School representatives from the GO teams and community representatives selected by the Atlanta Board of Education. And I even if some of these questions are repetitive, I'm going to go through every single one of these just to make sure that we acknowledge all of them. How were the community reps identified and selected? That was also by Miss Elaine Hudson. And the answer was a list of interested community members who shared their interests via a Google form and were sent to board members for review. Marshall Norsang, how can this practically be divorced from eSPLOS? Capital budget presumably is a huge variability in the planning of the future footprint. This is not divorced from eSPLOS, but will occur prior to the eSPLOS project that will come after this May through December 2025 comprehensive facilities plans process. Virginia Chu asked, why?
Can I get, George,
Yes.
I just want to answer something just a little bit more on that one.
Yes, please.
It obviously won't be divorced from it, but here's what's got to happen is that what tends to happen in eSPLOS programs is that the most immediate needs always come up and then they're answered pretty quickly. And it's not always the most immediate need that really gets a long-term vision. What we want to make sure of is that we're not doing the things that kind of stand in the way of what can happen further down the road. And so I think it helps inform it, but it does, I mean, eSPLOS has a huge part of this, obviously. We just want to make sure that the projects that we're putting in front of eSPLOS for the next eSPLOS to come out don't really kind of stand in the programmatic goals and how we want to address the district in the long term.
Thank you. And Tracy, please feel free to jump in on any of these if you can expand. Now we'll go to the question submitted by Virginia Chu. Why is the number of task force members different by cluster? Midtown 13, North Atlanta 11, Washington 9, Carver 8, May 6. And the answer is every school has one representative spot, and then board members could select community representatives that may represent multiple clusters and schools. From Ms. Clara Green, what guidance and metrics did the school board members use to select representatives? We provided the board with a list of the identified GO team representatives from schools in their districts, including their role, experience, background, and additional information provided. We also provided them the same information for every community representative that shared their interest. We asked that board members review the representation from Go teams and seek to identify gaps that needed to be filled with their selections. Another question from Mr. Marshall Noor Singh. Does live attended include private schools? Last I heard, many, in parentheses, most private schools were not reporting. Matters because if we have a recession, privates move over. And then the answer is live attended does not include private students, homeschool, or state charter students. It includes all APS students, including APS-sponsored charter students.
I'll jump in again really quick, George. Again, this is a really important piece. I think that when you're looking at that, you're right. They do not, the state doesn't require that they report all these. And the other piece to that is that we're not exactly, especially in private schools around where they're not necessarily all coming from APS. And so if they're coming from outside, let's say the district lines into a private school here, are they really APS students? I do think that this is a reason that, first of all, you don't kind of go down to the bare bones of it, what a district needs from a capacity standpoint. You've got to leave some flexibility out there for occurrences like this and fluctuations in enrollment that could happen. But the other piece is that's why it's really, really important not just pay attention to the October count, but to the March count to see what that shifting enrollment does over time. Because we also see that students will come out of charter mid-year and go back to APS or vice versa. And so, again, it's just a continuous kind of look at this to make sure that we provide some flexibility in the plan that doesn't get in our way in the future. And this is a really great question, so thanks for asking it.
This question is from Virginia Chu. Regarding birth rate predictions, is that based on the hospital-driven data where births can happen all over, regardless of home, or a district survey/census type of source? The answer given is birth data is provided by the Georgia Department of Public Health and based on the address of the mother. Births are allocated to each of the 45 attendance areas and by school year. September 2nd through September 1st, kindergarten eligibility dates. Georgia Department of Public Health provides us the date in these slices of data. Mia Garnett writes, when I see a blank space in the last reno space, can you give more insight on what that means? Last reno is the most recent renovation of a particular facility. While a facility may be built in the 1920s or 70s, it may have had much more recent major renovation to address aging systems at that time. This is from Miss Ansley. Will this presentation go into specific clusters? How many APS clusters are being considered for redistricting/rezoning? The state of the school provides cluster profiles to show a lot of this data at the cluster level, starting at page 33. And Ms. Ansley, there was also a link there provided for you to the state of the schools. Ms. Elaine.
Also, really quickly on that, the second question, how many clusters are being considered for redistricting or rezoning? Again, there's no kind of decision on that. Will redistricting and rezoning be part of kind of the scenarios that we can develop? Absolutely. We do want to look at that. We understand there's imbalance of enrollment out there. But sometimes just redistricting or rezoning doesn't just fix that, because then people just decide they're just going to transfer anyway. So we need to look at what impacts of redistricting and rezoning mean, how do we look at our feeder patterns and how they kind of populate our schools as you go from elementary to middle and high. But what I really want to stress here is that we don't know how many would be rezoned right now. But as we go through more of this community process and we see that kind of level of tolerance for redistricting and rezoning, that will be part of this decision making.
We will go to Miss Elaine's question. She goes, did I hear mention of a survey currently being circulated to community members? I could have misheard. No, Miss Elaine, you heard correctly, and Travis has provided the link to that survey. And I've also made a note here for myself to make sure that we can make that link easily findable and user-friendly on the landing page. Miss Marissa Hammett, is the information at the in-person meeting tonight different from what was being presented in this meeting? No, it is the same information, Miss Marissa, and just for your sense of security, you'll also be able to confirm that as we will be recording that meeting. Miss Mia Garrett, in regards to the blank space in the last reno, does that mean a school has not received funds for renovation since being built? The answer is blank space means there was not a major renovation, but all facilities have received funds for some form of renovation or infrastructure investment. Ms. Virginia Chu, is the in-person meeting tonight the same as this presentation? Yes, Ms. Chu, it is. And again, yeah, you will also be able to find it on the YouTube page within 24 to 48 hours after tonight. Is there a reason why Carver, the oldest school in the district, has not had a major renovation when newer schools have? Carver High School has had a major renovation, and we will ensure that that date is provided. So we will update that. So those were all of the questions that were submitted in the Q&A feature in the answered tab. If you would like to now move over to the open tab, I will start from the top. I think what we can do here on this open tab is, Tracy, I'll just read these out because I think these are different. And then do you just want to answer them as we go through?
That's fine. I'm not sure I know where is it like the open chat?
Yeah, open, excuse me, yep, open. In the Q&A feature, you'll have open, it has in parentheses 22.
Okay.
Right next to the answered. So I'm going to the very top one that was submitted at 12:14 by Shayna Pennywell. And her question is, what is the ETA for potential redistricting for facilities purposes? What is the plan for staffing when, if the boundaries are redrawn? We are in Grant Park with a rising MJHS and there are far too many enrolled children from a huge area. It looks like Travis is also answering this in there as to memorialize it. But Tracy, anything you'd like to add, or anybody else?
Take me back. I'm sorry. I was trying to get this shared really quickly.
Oh, you're good.
Am I on the right page? Is that right?
Let me see. I'm sorry. I can't. Right now, what it's showing me, it's just showing me your survey. But either way, even if we can't see it, I mean, if you're in the Q&A feature, everybody will be able to confirm that we're answering all their questions, and I can just read them out, Tracy, and I know Travis.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah.
So for Shayna Pennywell, what is the ETA for the potential redistricting for facilities purposes? And I'll stop there.
So I think that, again, when we identify potential for any redistricting that could happen, in kind of that, we would have to look at the scenarios and then the options and the recommendations about when that could occur. Obviously, we want to give communities enough notification and inform enough in front. And so, again, the plan that we're putting together right now will be delivered to the board in November and December. And any sort of redistricting that might occur because of that plan would be communicated if it were to occur in the what would be the 26 and 27 school year. So even if there was, and I don't know where they would be yet, again, we haven't gotten to that portion of this planning process, it wouldn't happen until 26 or 27.
And her follow-up to that is, what is the plan for staffing when / if the boundaries are redrawn?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that, working with HR and understanding the programmatic needs of those students and the capacity and the student enrollment, those will be important. Again, that staffing piece is a critical piece to this. We want to make sure that not just communities are informed of what will move forward, but also the staff to make sure that we can move forward. I think that one thing that when we go through comprehensive plans like this, one of the things that gets brought up all the time is the worry about will I lose my job or will I lose my position? Generally what we find in a comprehensive plan is that even realigning of facilities would require the same amount of teachers out there that we need to teach students. And so, but it also kind of merges with retirements and people who just stop working or they transfer out of the district or get promoted into district positions. So there is attrition that happens in school districts. And so what you do is we do want to align the staffing the right way and be very proactive in making sure that everybody's identified to make sure those schools are fully supported.
And I think one comment that she just wanted to be reflected is that she's in Grant Park with a rising
Yep.
JHS, and there are far
Yep.
too many enrolled children from a huge area.
Yeah, there's definitely a utilization thing we're dealing with in that area that has to be addressed in this plan.
Stephen Owens at 1221, his question was, it sounds like a lot of people in the chat have brought up concerns around the communication of these sessions and the timeline. Can you speak to how you will address this issue? Have you considered more engagement that is cluster specific?
Yeah, yeah.
Tracy, you want to answer that first, and then I'll piggyback on something.
Absolutely. I think that when we identify, like you see those community meeting dates out in the future, we're actually kind of identifying the weeks for those dates that are going to require that we do deeper dives into certain clusters in certain neighborhoods. And so, part of this is really as we get through this first stage and get our kind of rules established from the community and from the data, we want to make sure that we're identifying really areas that are going to have most impact. Every area will be included in this, certainly, but when we see the need to do a deeper dive into a cluster, into a community, we are going to make that effort to make sure that happens. And so when you just see like a specific date, it's just kind of that holding place for the week to make sure that we're identifying that again and still offering all these virtual opportunities to allow people to come in when they can't attend those, even if they're more specific to their cluster.
And one of the things I wanted to add to this and stress is just keep this in mind. I mean, at least four. I mean, if need be, and we've done this in the past, we'll be willing to engage and hear as much as we need to, and as far as schedule and capacity will allow. So at least four public meetings have already been identified. And the other thing I would ask anybody that is on this chat right now, that on the general conversation chat, if you can put in any emails, if there is certain HOAs, PTAs, just your personal email, whatever it is that you want us to make sure that every time we put out a press release, every time we put out a new flyer, anytime anything new comes out, we will add you to that list to make sure that you are engaged, because this is a transparent process. I wanted now to go to Miss Lisa Olmsted question submitted at 1226. In the last FMP process, one data point that I found very helpful was the housing yield numbers, and knowing that the Atlanta Regional Commission was involved. Will those yields number be included again? And is the ARC involved?
That is a piece of data that the task force asked for also that we're going to be engaging to get. We do think that's an important piece to this. Again, trying to inform us, not only how much like housing in an area is impacting from a yield perspective, but even the type of housing is really important to us because it can help inform kind of what development will happen or what's going to happen in these city plans out there. And so just staying in the know of that and keeping communications with the city is going to be important to this. We do know that it's important from the perspective of, the mayor's initiative to look forward about how we get more affordable housing in the city to attract, younger families in here, what that's going to mean to certain clusters versus other clusters. I actually think it's a big part of the demographic piece we do. And again, understanding the yield helps us understand not every not every place generates a student necessarily. And some areas we've seen some pretty significant growth in housing, but we haven't seen any impact on student enrollment. And maybe that's because they're younger families that we need to engage in this process more. So anybody out there who can get these younger families engaged that might not be connected to this, please do, because we think that's important. But we're going to have to we're going to do a deeper dive, especially in those areas that we're going to see this housing change going on.
And just to make sure everybody's on the same page, we are on the Q&A feature of the Zoom chat. If you go to the open tab, we are going through each question. We have answered all the questions on the answered tab that were 19. We're now on the open tab, and we are now going to Miss Lisa Olmsted. Her question was submitted at 12:31. Also, in the last FMP, principals were able to appeal the FMP's calculation of capacity, which was very helpful. Will that happen again this time?
Yes. So what we have engaged in also is not only are they going to review it because we're keeping the principals updated in this process also. They have links to the state of the schools to make sure to look at that capacity, but how their buildings are being used. But we're also doing a master schedule overlay, especially on middle schools and high schools, a master schedule overlay on floor plans of how many students are in which rooms at what period of the day, to give us a pretty good analysis of how space is being used. And so, which will be helpful for us to see what's going on in the schools too, but also be another tool for principals to look at to see how their buildings can be used. So I think this is really important to get that principal feedback to see kind of what's happening day to day in their school buildings. Again, from a utilization standpoint, this and the numbers really do matter. I mean, I think that when you start to see, especially, high schools that are shifting in that 90, 95, 100%, over 100%, those are concerning because you're lacking the programmatic space then to deliver the right, the amount of program that you want to be able to do, and it limits. And so we're paying attention to both ends, overutilization, underutilization, as this plan moves forward.
This question is piggybacking on that. This is from Ms. Stephanie Diaz at 12:33. Regarding utilization, are you stating that buildings that are underutilized will be considered for closing, and there will be consolidation or rezoning with nearby schools where there is overcrowding?
Again, utilization by building doesn't, I mean, what I'm more interested in making sure that we have the right amount of students programmatically to fully fund the school building, to have the right programs in the building. It doesn't mean that a school that's underutilized is a school that might be considered for consolidation. It might be actually a receiving school because it can host more students. Or it can come in the East Blast where we're looking at reinvestment in the neighborhoods where we are making sure that we have the buildings in the right place for students. So I think that's, again, utilization is just one data point to consider when you're thinking about program offerings, live attend analysis, condition, the funding of the school. All of those things come into play. Housing, again, that comes into play. So utilization is just one funding or one decision point. It's not the end all decision point.
The next question was submitted by Miss Elizabeth Wickland. This was at 12:34. I'm thrilled to see pre-K 3 and 4 as a priority in the work. Where do we get more info about pre-K, such as how many existing seats there are per cluster in relation to students in the cluster? And also, what are the goals for pre-K 3 to match the same number of seats as pre-K 4?
So that is information that we can definitely get to get into the state of schools, and I think that'll be important information. For the goals of the pre-K 3, we'll likely engage not likely, we will engage the early childhood department here to talk about. Again, sometimes funding is not a matter of how many students are available for pre-K, but there's funding that's associated with pre-K that has to be kind of considered also. One of the reasons we don't project pre-K enrollment is because It is typically a program that is really based on how much funding a district has available for early childhood. This district has a commitment to expanding their pre-K program. As we go through this, the development of those goals for pre-K 3 to pre-K 4 will be developed to make sure our facilities can accommodate that, regardless of what the model looks like.
The next one is from Andrew Francis. This was submitted at 12:39. Does APS use different formulas for different parts of the city when projecting number of students that will live in new apartments / townhomes?
So I think that from a formula standpoint, remember that the data that is used from an enrollment projection standpoint is historical data based on all the types of housing, all the birth data, historical enrollment, those factors that are out there. And so if that area is changing their kind of housing type, we need to, in our housing analysis, we need to pay attention to that to see if there's any alterations to the projection that we do. But if that has been a traditional area of, multifamily housing or single family housing or whatever the housing is, housing type, that is calculated into the progression ratio. But the yield analysis and then also what you're asking about could possibly be what we call student potential analysis or a build out scenario, which sometimes looks different than a projection because it might be based on future stuff out there that is unpredictable. And so I think that once again, when we come to that projection, I think paying attention to the housing and then continuously updating in the October and March numbers to kind of see what the impacts of those are, to look at our projections. I think from a district-wide perspective, our projections end up being very, very close. They're less than 0.05% off in a first year, and typically less than 2% after 3 years on a district-wide perspective. I'm more concerned to make sure that we get the cluster level projections right, and those things that you're asking about, we need to pay attention to.
The next question was submitted at 12:44, and that was from Katan Ajanaku. How did you determine the timeline for coming to a decision on the plan? Is 7 months enough time to determine a plan that will take over the next 10 years?
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple answers to that. I think you can plan for a long time or plan a shorter time to get there. But I think one of the things that is really informing this is that the next anticipated ask for an eSPLOS program and having time to develop the eSPLOS based on that. And so is 7 months enough time? If we can get the right community engagement out there to make sure that we can develop the long-term goals of the district, we can focus on those longer term goals in the 7 months and then use that 6 months leading to eSPLOS to get our more short-term goals in place. Yeah, you could spend a year doing this, but in 7 months, because the process is intended to be so engaged with the community across the process and how many engagements we have with the board, we feel like we can complete this in 7 months. And then allow us to build a real comprehensive eSPLOS program that is going to benefit, that is going to lead to more benefits over the generations of students. So we, again, the timeline is 7 months as directed by the board, and we'll get there.
And one thing I did want to piggyback on that is I think you might have heard Tracy just mention this. The 7 month process really that you're outlining right there is really the community engagement process and things that come along with that nature. But there's also been a lot of time that has been invested on the background. For example, if you look at the State of the Schools report that's already been posted and the time and the resources that were put before this process coming into fruition. And also, if you even look at some of the things that have been happening independently in the school system with their overall strategic plan. So 7 months would be more considered of us being able to start engaging with the community as we're developing and presenting everything finally to the board. The next question is from Miss Chanel Collins. This was submitted at 12:46. When you're discussing programming, are we focusing on current program offerings, STEM, IB, college and career, etc.?
Absolutely. We're looking at, and when I one of the things that when I alluded earlier to seeing the numbers within the numbers, we're paying attention to those program offerings and the programs of interest, but also programs of success out there. One thing that CTAE is looking at is CTAE is always evolving. It's constantly looking at labor statistics and projected growth of the job market and adapting to that, but also looking at student interest and where we see more student interest. So those are absolutely being paid attention to. We want to make sure that we continue to promote successful programs and have the facilities to accommodate those, but also the ability to look at those future programs that, what could be offered in the buildings that would, again, maintain students and attract students into the district.
Andrew Francis at 1247, when coming up with draft maps of future clusters, was software used to help generate brand new cluster maps like states do when drawing new congressional districts? Letting software generate things from scratch helps people envision new options instead of trying to just tinker around the edges of the current maps.
Well, Andrew, that's a great question. We use geographic information systems analytics to map and to project impacts. There are 3 people on this team that are GIS analysts that take this information to help develop those options and to do a deeper dive. I agree with you. I don't think we should just tinker around the edges. I think that tinker around the edges means we don't look in the further term that we could, but really having an understanding of when something is developed, when an option or scenario gets developed, what is the impact across the district, not just to a certain area. And our tools allow us to do that. So we will be using those GIS tools in order to help us shape some of that discussion with the community.
At 1256, Eden K submitted, how can the input truly be considered if the meetings go until November and the final plan is slated to be approved in December?
Mm-hmm. So I think that again, the term I use is iterative. Every kind of step builds on the next step, and so this version of this step of the facilities plan is really about creating kind of those rules around it, that the community has that input, but also data is informing us about what rules can be also in the planning. But as we go through the next stages, what we want to make sure of is that when we get to this idea of are there scenarios out there that we'll be working with task force members and communities to develop kind of pathways for challenges and opportunities. How does that help shape them, what recommendations could look like? And then when those recommendations come out, I mean, are those recommendations influenced by timeline, impact on the community, and how do we get that feedback? And so I think it's just continuous and an iterative process that allows you to build upon each step to make sure that you're refining the process as you go along. I think the first, that after we get kind of these rules established, kind of staying within those rules to come up with some scenarios that are defensible by the rules, allow us to stay within the parameters that the data and the community wants us to stay within. And then if there are things that can't fall within those parameters, that we better have pretty good explanations about why they don't fit in parameters but need to exist in a plan like this. And so I think that when you get to that point of recommendations and refining those, some of those refining come in, and even though that might be a good recommendation, can we really do it in this timeline that we've established, and do we have to refine that? So I think that, again, a great question about how you continuously build this, but each stage is intended to get a little deeper into the data and a little deeper into the decision making to make sure it's being informed from both sides of data and the community.
Yeah, and just to keep in mind, I mean, to as simply as I can put it, is this is a living document. This will all be flowing, and as Tracy just said, at each meeting, we will have a better idea and a greater identified scope based off the participation from the community, the feedback from the surveys, the not just the participation in the community task force, but also people that just come and sit in and listen on those meetings. So all of these things are part of that, and each of these things will help to give greater clarity as we get closer and closer to the presentation date for the board to make a consideration. Miss Isabel York at 1257. Hi from Warren T. Jackson Elementary. How long is the survey open for?
The survey is going to be open for, I was just looking at the calendar for that, is going to be open all the way through June. Probably we say June 13th, but we typically just leave it open for the weekend through the 15th. So we have about 4 weekends that people can participate in this survey. We'll make sure that people are reminded of this through communications, constant communication to say, hey, the survey's still open. We'd like for you to participate. And so it's going to be open for a few weeks.
And you know, I think last time I checked, there was about 121 participants on this call. So hopefully all of you will go and not only take the survey, but encourage one other person to take the survey today. We would love to get as many people to be able to participate in that survey as possible, especially between now and June 15th. And I have made a note here that we will talk and make sure that we can add an easy to find button on the landing page for you to not only take the survey, but share with others. Ms. Kelly Stewart at 1258. How does athletics play a role in planning and frameworks?
So I also see that there's a follow-up, especially as we consider live attend. You know, I think one of the things that we need to make sure of is that really, first of all, paying attention to the accessibility and the condition of those facilities that students are participating in. And so trying to get participation numbers and, you know, making sure that the facilities, so the kind of the first role of it will be, you know, identifying where we don't have equitable facilities across the district from both a accessibility and even a condition standpoint. But also then it also will probably have to identify in time the types of athletics that we will be supporting. And so especially considering that live attend analysis, you know, obviously we know that students transfer across district for many reasons, whether it's access to fine arts or to an IB program, or maybe athletics even. I mean, there's different reasons that students and families choose different areas to live, and for the success of their students. So I think, again, just reiterate really quickly, first and foremost is making sure that we have the right types of athletic facilities in the right areas and the condition, and then making sure that we have the right facilities to support the enrollments that are coming into them. So that's how we use athletics as part of this. Again, one of the questions that we ask in the framework is that are important, you know, kind of the priorities of things. You know, it's amazing how, you know, the backgrounds of people and what makes a bigger priority in a facilities plan. I believe that all parts of a facility are important. And because you want to offer the ability to have access to these, to everything that students need to attend. Now, they can't be everywhere, we know that, but how do you make the most benefit of the athletic facilities, fine arts facilities, special ed facilities, you know, gifted facilities, pre-K facilities? I think all of those come as a part of our framework from a condition, availability, and accessibility and number standpoint.
Our next question was submitted by an anonymous attendee. It was at 1258. Can this flyer and these dates be shared through APS district communication to parents and family? And can that invitation come with a simple explanation of what the CLRFP actually is and why is it relevant to families? I fear the topic is going over the heads of some people. Tracy, if you're okay, I'd like to start with this one.
Yep.
So the first thing is that, yes, I believe that Travis already shared and some folks had shared with him some different channels that they'd like the flyer and press releases and media advisories to go out. We will definitely continue to do that. And I will also encourage you and anyone that is still on the chat right now, on the Zoom right now, to type into the chat any sort of listservs or any sort of emails, whether it's personal or organizations, that we can send this information out to. The other thing also about the CLRFP is, yes, I definitely understand. I mean, the comprehensive long-range facilities plan is a bit of a mouthful, even with the acronym. But we try to really make that as conversational as possible, while at the same time taking everything into account. And this is a comprehensive plan, right? This is not just talking about programming and education and classroom sizes. This is also talking about performing arts. This is talking about early childhood education. This is talking about workforce development and workforce housing. So that is a comprehensive, a long list of things that deal for the facilities and the school system. So the last thing that I will mention is I know that on the landing page, if it's not on there yet, it will be added soon. There is a press release out there that is very, again, conversational is the best term that I can use, that can show families why this is relevant to them, and particularly parents who really wonder why there isn't a performing arts school in the city of Atlanta, in Atlanta Public Schools. So we understand that this topic may go over some people's heads, and we're really trying to find that balance between being conversational and in layman's terms, but at the same time also being able to capture everything that involves this. Is there anything you want to add, Tracy? I think Travis may also be typing something.
Yeah, Travis, I mean, I agree. I mean, for this question, I think planning is complicated, and there's no question. And the last thing I want to do is exclude anybody because of the complication, if that's a word of it. Because I do think that people come to the table with different concerns and different opportunities in their head and about how schools should operate. And so, and when you see a city the size of Atlanta and the different needs across the city, those can become, priorities differ across the district. So that's that's the complication of this. So this is, and we're taking this to heart again, making sure that we communicate as much as we can and put the outreach out there so people do really understand what this is about. Again, one of those questions about when we open the questionnaire about the priorities, what'll be easier to define will be the goals based on that community feedback that this plan will lead to. And so again, part of the iterative process is, okay, we do have goals for, programmatically rich schools and good condition schools and building efficiencies and those kind of things. But they're going to differ per area, per cluster, per geography in the city. So I think this will become a more defined answer, but we do need to communicate it more and more as we move forward. So thanks for the question.
Yes, and just to reiterate, we are on the Q&A feature. We've answered 34 questions. We have an open 3 right now, and there have been 4 that's been dismissed. We'll go into Joe York's question, which is at 105. Knowing the budget shortfall looming, is there a specific dollar amount given to this group as a target for optimization slash efficiency across the APS system?
So I think that, I think this is a great question because the one thing that, we are very clear on is that, facilities plan, although has, it will have funding implications to it. What we want to do is build those efficiencies in there. When we talked about things like that, for instance, that $650 million of deficiencies out there, are those really necessary deficiencies that we have to address, or, through a plan, can we decrease some of these expenditures that are going to have to go out? The other, a lot of it comes in, again, paying attention to transportation routes and staffing of buildings and, efficient staffing of buildings where we're not spread so thin, where we have the ability to be more efficient in our staffing models. And so, although not, and it's not the best answer, although there's not a specific goal given to the budget savings, one of the primary focus of this is how do you get the buildings where they need to be, and then what's the cost impact of that? And so, and knowing that there can be efficiencies in facilities, but again, facilities can only go so far. We can help with, how much buildings can be used and how many buildings there are and the type of condition they are in a facilities plan. But again, it takes a larger conversation around the types of staffing that go in these buildings and, to what level, from a more operational standpoint that the district, as they implement it. So yeah, we're going to work towards efficiency, certainly, and part of the efficiencies are financial efficiencies. but we need to see what that looks like first from a perspective of how these buildings will support the programs and students of APS.
Thank you for everybody that's still sticking with us. Don't worry, we're still going to get through everything. I just wanted to let you know that we're about 1:45 right now. This last question that we have open was submitted at 1:11. This was also from the anonymous attendee. Can the flyer that was posted in the presentation be added to the webpage? Yes, I've made a note of that. I also don't see the task force meetings on the webpage or the location for them if they are going to be open to the public. And I have also made a note of that here. And just to piggyback on that, I want you to know that everybody on this project is genuine, but unfortunately, none of us will be perfect. So I appreciate you highlighting things like this. And this is what I ask you to judge us on too, is after you make these things aware to me in particular, you'll see that we will not only make note of them, but we will push them and make sure that they get quickly added. So just want you to know that all the questions up to this point that have been submitted have been answered. Just for transparency's sake, I'm just going to read these 4 that were dismissed because they really weren't questions. One was from Ms. Lisa Olmsted at 12:09. Thank you. I didn't see the list last week, but we'll go back and look again today. At 12:22, Miss Elaine Hudson. I don't remember getting a form. At 1:04 p.m., Miss Kelly Stewart, especially as we consider live/attend analysis. And then Mr. Katan Ajanaku at 1:11. It looks like my question was skipped, but then it was not skipped. I think he was just didn't see we were going down the line. Those were all of the questions that were put in the Q&A portion. Now, unless there's any major objection from Tracy or any of the other folks, which I don't think there will be, I'm just going to go into the chat portion. Now, in this chat portion, some of these questions may have already been answered. And if it's questions that we've already answered, I'll note that. If you think that I've missed something by mistake, please let me know. But I just want to make sure that we're conscious of everybody's time. If we're looking at the webinar chat, I'm starting at 11:55. Then we see Travis giving everybody at 12:03, he's providing a link to the landing page so you can follow the process. And he's also making sure that everybody knows that they can submit questions through the Q&A feature. Now we're getting to the first question at 12:13. This looks like it's from Satu Garrett. Where can we find the list of the members on the task force? Is there a breakdown of what school/community each member represents? Yes, if you go to the atlantapublicschools.us/APS 2040 landing page and you hit the 3 people icon, you can see that list. And that was one of the questions we answered earlier. This is from Miss Lisa Olmsted at 12:13. I didn't see the 6 p.m. meeting on the APS website. It is listed on the APS website. If you go to the landing page, you will see where they have the virtual meeting options, and right under that, they have the in-person meeting options. But I have made a note on here for us to also just place that flyer for familiarity's sakes, so everybody can see all that information clearly. From Miss Eden K at 12:13, which I believe this is the same question she asked earlier. Please remind us of the timeline of the options presentation dates in comparison to the dates you just posted for community engagement sessions. It seems like the engagement sessions do not leave a lot of time between the last date and the final approved date of December 2025. Tracy, I'll take a stab at this just because I know we answered it earlier. If you think if you need to add anything, let me know. But basically, a couple things. The process that we're going through in these next 7 months, this is a living document. This is a growing process, and it is a process that really engages all of community stakeholders, all of the public, and takes their input. So there has been enough time for this to not only come to fruition, but also the planning on the back end, whether it be the state of the schools or even forgive me, I lost my words, but the strategic plan, excuse me, that the school system is working on independently. Tracy, anything you think we need to add on that?
No, I mean, I think the concern of making sure that, again, turning around the feedback from the options to the recommendations will be important. And, we're staffed to do just that. We're not, we're not bare bones to this. We have enough staff, and we have the internal staff to help us to make sure we turn this around efficiently to get it back to the community from that perspective. Knowing that's a concern, we'll, again, continue to keep that a priority. So thanks for that comment.
1216, Miss Lisa Olmsted said, last week the website didn't list the person option tonight at 6 p.m. Will tonight's meeting be the same information covered this afternoon? Yes, it will. She also said, on behalf of CINS, we are trying to make sure our community is aware of the events, but it is hard if the information is changing and will lead to frustration with the process. Ms. Lisa, thanks for making that note. And on your group for CINS, if there's an email point of contact and you're still on here, please add it into the chat. I'll make a note of it. The other thing is that I definitely understand your concern, but I do want you to know that at least the dates that are on that flyer right now, August 25th, October 20th, and November 10th, are dates that we can have hard. We're working out logistics on making sure we're having the right locations for space and for proximity to folks, but you can save those dates. Also, the week of October 21st through the 23rd, there'll be virtual meetings along with a virtual option for noon and an in-person option at 6 p.m. for the meetings that we'll be having in August, October, and November. But please let us know if you have some additional contacts that you'd like us to add so we can get you this information. From Stephen Owens at 1217, on the communications around these meetings, lots of folks in the Washington cluster are unaware of when these meetings are and how they can participate. Stephen, thanks for making that comment. If you're still on here, send me your email. I'll use you also as one of the point of contacts. Also, if I'm not mistaken, I do know that the principals have been made aware of these meetings, that there was a meet, and they also were all brought collectively, so they should also be aware of this. But if there's PTAs or groups, please just let us know, because the more people we reach, the greater our chance of being able to get everybody's input. At 1218, Curry Hitchens, the task force members are listed on the website and which cluster they represent. Thank you for putting that link. At 1218, Abby Greenbaum, adding my agreement that communication about these events is lacking in the Carver cluster as well. Thank you, Abby. Same thing. Please send me your email, your personal email. I'll make sure that you get everything directly. And also anybody over for that Carver cluster, whether it's PTAs, religious organizations, after school programs, anybody that you think needs to be a part of this, let me know. We'll make sure that you get this. Same thing for Mr. Katan Ajanaku at 1218. He said same with the Mays cluster, and Miss Elaine Hudson, same with the Carver cluster. Miss Elaine, you can join Miss Abby, and please send me your email if you're still on this chat. Mr. Katan Ajanaku at 1219. Many parents just found out about this meeting today, Beecher Hills. I'm glad that you were at least able to be on here, Mr. Katana Janaku. If you are in that Beecher Hills area, please, please, please share with folks what you've learned here today. But more importantly, make sure that you also share with them that they have an opportunity to join us today at 6 p.m. at 130 Trinity Avenue. Or they can also go to the APS YouTube page to see this meeting in its entirety, along with the meeting tonight at 6 p.m. in its entirety within 24 to 48 hours. Siobhan Slack at 12:21. I am a parent representing Carver's Go Team. My daughter has been there since ninth grade. She is currently a junior, and I just found out about these meetings. Ms. Slack, thank you for your comment. Please, I'm going to encourage you, put your email on here because I'm going to reach you directly and make sure you get this. But also, we will follow up with Carver's Go Team to ensure that the principals, the PTAs, and anybody inside of the school knows of this and is sharing this so we can push the boundaries of exposure. Ms. Shanna Pennywell at 12:23. There's over $2 trillion in APS real estate. And if memory serves, there's 100 million plus in renovations cost. I am in the MJH cluster, MJHS cluster, which would be our home school in our neighborhood. It is fairly new, so it is surprising the level of renovation it requires from the last facility report. In case Tracy or anybody wants to say anything, please do. But one thing that I did want to mention for a disclaimer, I'm not sure if that number is accurate. $2 trillion in APS real estate, and your memory serves you as $100 million in renovations costs. I can't confirm that, but if somebody on this call can, let us know. If not, we'll look into it. Unless there's any objection, I'll move to the next comment, which is at 12:23 from Miss Lisa Olmsted. Please provide revision dates when you update this document. Thank you. 12:24 from Andrew Francis. That there are different numbers of schools in each cluster, and each school has one rep. This is at 12:24 from Robin McGee. Can you share more background details about the task force members, demographics, connections to APS? Yeah, we shared how they were put together, and also how you can find the task force members on the atlantapublicschools.us/APS 2040 page. Travis also replied to Virginia on here at 12:24. Virginia, thanks for the question. Every school has one representative, and then board members could select community representatives that may represent multiple clusters and schools. So this goes into also your question, Robin McGee, about the task force. Curry Hitchens, again at 12:25, just made a comment that it looks like the Jackson cluster has 12 members on the task force. Claire Green, what were the metrics/rubrics for how board members selected community representatives? That was answered earlier. They submitted folks that wanted to be selected and were interested were either submitted a questionnaire or filled out a form online that was then given for review to the Board of Education and make selections from. Elaine Hudson at 12:30. Are you counting children who move into the district that were born somewhere else? Seems like you're only using birth rates to calculate projections. Tracy, is that something you want to handle?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that the baseline of a progression ratio from birth to kindergarten isn't a 1-to-1, as you know. There are students that are born here that move out, and there are students that aren't born here that move in. And so the progression ratio over the years, the last, we can use 10, 15, 5, whatever the number of years to calculate is one factor that in the initial kind of progression ratios, but it's never 1-to-1. You're exactly right. There are kids that move in from outside the district, but there's kids that leave the district before they enter into the school system. But how that is influenced by the types of housing and the progression ratios. It's one of the reasons we do a live-in analysis and not necessarily an enrollment projection, because the enrollment projection can be factored by a lot of different things, including students that choose that live attend analysis. Those shifts of students can impact an enrollment projection without any sort of demographic reason for it. And so why would we put something that doesn't have demographic backing into it? And so all of it goes into play into some level. There is some art to projections, obviously, when you see that, for instance, when you see a progression ratio that might not meet what you currently see out there. So maybe, for instance, you see an area that didn't have like large entry rates at kindergarten, but now have 1,000 more homes. You may adjust the progression ratio for that area a little higher to trend more to the housing data that allows it to adjust to the new housing, not just based on all the historical stuff. And so, yeah, a lot of factors go into this, certainly. But yeah, but definitely in your initial question, it's not a one-to-one. We know it's not, but we also do know that there's a certain percentage of students that do come into the district from a birth age or from a birth year into the district at a certain time.
And to piggyback on Elaine's question, this is from Kate I. Trich Williams at 1232. To Elaine's point, the neighborhoods near the south and southwest Beltline are seeing a big influx of families with small kids. They are often moving into homes that had previously housed older residents. Correct me if I'm wrong, but those numbers don't seem to be accounted in the birth rate and affordable housing construction numbers.
So that's exactly what we're talking about, where we make some adjustments. One of the task force members and I had probably a 20-minute discussion, specifically around the Beltline, around the number of young families that are coming into that area, and making sure that the projections kind of reflect that out there. I think the other piece to that is that, remember, there's a debit and credit side to everything, is that although we see, there are going to be some replenishing of this, that it has to be able to offset the less number of births that it traditionally saw, or the housing that was there, and can adjust to the new housing that's there. And so I think that's exactly right. Paying attention to those areas that, not only have we seen this happening and not necessarily seen the kids yet, but again, I want to be rest assured that one of the task force members and I had a long conversation around this, right after the meeting, to make sure that we were paying close attention to this, especially on that Beltline. But we'll look at other parts of the city that the mayor and city government is kind of targeted for a reinvestment of housing.
At 1233, Katana Janaku, completely agree with Elaine and Kate. At 1236, Andrew Francis. This is actually a big concern in denser areas of the city. The APS formula for predicting students from new apartment/townhome developments seems to be undercounting in the Jackson cluster, hence the overcrowding predictions.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that there are parts of the city, and I'll more specifically look at this one to make sure it's being addressed. But there was one part of the city I was really paying attention to that, and I got to go back and look at it. It was about a week and a half ago, where the housing has increased dramatically, but the student enrollment has dropped. And so it's not as simple as just looking at housing out there. If that were the case, then I would look at that projected housing out there and I would say, well, does that mean I have to decrease the number of students because there seems to be an inverse reaction to this? And so it's a little matter of, and again, it's paying attention to, okay, where are those kids in the current system and where's the bubble of enrollment that is occurring? Because even again, if we replaced this declining birth rate by birth area, and offset it by the new housing in there, you may just get a stable projection. And so again, it's paying attention to the debit and credit, and then also paying attention to where the enrollment sits today. Because if I had, like I said, 1,000 more kindergartners a year ago, and let's just say it's 50 more kindergartners in an area, I'd not only have to get the 50 to replace it to offset any housing growth. And so based on a yield where yields can be, at an elementary grade level, 0.2 or 0.3 per household, to have 50 less births in an area, this is just an example. If I had 50 less births in an area at 0.3 yield for a elementary enrollment, I'd have to have 150 units replace that. And so part of it is making sure you're paying attention to both sides of the equation and making sure that we do have enough space for the future. Once again, a plan isn't intended to reduce the district down to its bare bones. It has to have some flexibility for those demographic changes that will continue to occur over the next 50 years. that we can't move buildings, but we're going to have space. So I think that, again, those are some unsureties that always exist in a plan, but we pay attention to those things in more detail when, again, when we have people from those communities helping us represent that.
1238 from Abby Greenbaum. Questions in the Q&A feature seem to be getting answered more quickly. FYI, everyone. 1238, Stephen Owens. I really appreciate this data-driven approach, but worry about the role or lack thereof of equity and historical context. And then
Yeah.
the role, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, Stephen, on this one, look, legacy and historical context in cities like Atlanta are critical to the success of a plan like this. Equity has a kind of can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. We want to make sure that equity means that students have the access to the programs that they need in the space that provides that. But I agree with that, is that legacy, and it is if one piece of data has been told to me over the last 2 months that I've been 2 or 3 months that I've been working with the district, is you can't ignore the legacy of neighborhoods in Atlanta. And again, I do understand this. It's not, again, it's not my first kind of historical city I've worked in to pay attention to this. And that's going to have to matter at some level, no doubt.
From Kelly Stewart at 1247, where do these ratios come from regarding staffing?
So from a staffing standpoint, it's understanding that to get fully funded, a fully staffed from the instructional unit calculation, this is what it means to be fully funded in that. And so we make the relationship of how much locally funded units versus state units we can get to more offset that. So obviously, the more that we can direct the state level funding, which doesn't cover the cost of all students, obviously, because there is a certain amount that the district puts in. That gives us a general sense of the staffing ratios that we can get. We do know that when we get to that closer number of like 4 teachers per grade level to elementary, that brings enough FTEs in, full-time equivalency students, to help pay for a full-time nurse, full-time media specialist, that we'd have a full-time art teacher in the building, full-time if music, but that teachers aren't traveling and media specialists aren't traveling from school to school because there's not enough full-time equivalency funding in the building. And so we look at those ratios to make sure that we have those to a fully funded ability. And where we don't and where we can't make those, that's when decisions have to be made about where those dollars come from to fully staff those buildings. And typically what happens is that in an effort of equity, is that those schools that have enough students in there to get the full-time funding for all those positions actually have to sacrifice some of that to staff those other positions, especially in the light of when small school supplements start to disappear a little bit because of the budget issues that APS is facing.
I'm going to read these next 3 comments back to back, and then Tracy, I'll let you address it at the very end, but I think they might have taken care of this. This is from Miss Lisa Olmsted at 1249. Can you define CTAE? There may be people here with younger children who have not heard of this acronym. Miss Dana Jacoby at 1249 responded with career, technical, and agricultural education. Miss Lisa Olmsted then responded at 1251. Diane, thank you. I'm familiar with it because I have a high schooler and some high school pathways are under CTAE umbrella, but younger families might not know what this means and why it matters. And then the last one regarding this is from Crystal Saracen at 1257. Hi, Lisa. Added definition: CTAE is a program in schools designed to help students learn practical skills and knowledge that prepare them for future careers. Think hands-on learning and real-world experience. I don't think there's anything you need to add, right, Tracy?
No, but other than we need to make sure that that we're not just falling in our everyday lingo, that we understand that people don't understand all the terms out there because we use these acronyms. I will make sure I pay better attention to that. So thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, yeah, and please always make sure that you stop any of us if there's something that we need to expand on further. From Carla Green at 12:53. Can you drop a link to the survey? And Travis did drop that link to everybody in the chat, and we'll also make sure that it is placed on the landing page. From Kelly Stewart, how does athletics play a role in employment and frameworks? This was the same question she submitted earlier that was already answered. This is just about me not knowing how to work Zoom. And then Stu Garrett at 101. Will there be any future opportunities for new task force members? Tracy, Travis? I would think not. I would think there is not any future opportunity for new task force members because that window's already been open and gone. But if anybody has anything different, let me know. We'll go to Mark, 102. Okay, he was talking about Zoom. Stephen Owens, why was my question skipped? I don't think it was skipped, but we're about to get, oh, yep, I was just reading it out loud. Thanks, Travis. I got to head back to work, so I appreciate some. All right, so we'll make sure that we will, it looks like Travis has made note of your email, Stephen, and you saw that we answered your question. I think my question in pre-K and pre-4 was overlooked in the Q&A. We did get to that. Please consider sending survey out through Infinite Campus. I'll make a note of that, and I think Travis already acknowledged that for somebody else earlier. 1112, Miss Elizabeth Wickland, please consider sending out survey. Oh, sorry, I already read that. Katana Janaku, how did you determine the timeline for coming to this decision on the plan? Is 7 months enough time to determine a plan that would take place over the next 10 years? My question was skipped in the Q&A. Katana, it wasn't skipped. Hopefully you heard us. I think we were just getting through them, but they've answered that. Lisa Olmstead, for sending survey via method that reaches all caregivers. We got that. Joe York. Hello, I had a question on the Q&A. Unsure if I got it picked up. No, we did that one. Yes, we did, Joe. Katan, thank you. All right, we're going to get that email. Yep, we answered your, and Travis acknowledged it. Kelly Stewart, yep, we got to your question about how does athletics plays on this. All right, good. Everybody's letting everybody know that we're getting on there. Yep, we got that. Travis, just bear with me. All right, now Brianna, we got you sending in your email. We also got Elizabeth York sending in her email, Abby Greenbaum, Elizabeth Wickland, Carnegie Lee Furlow, Sinus, Lisa Olmstead, we got yours for CINS. Anna Valentine Mitchell, Kate Irich Williams, Joe York, thank you. All right, so yeah, a lot of you guys were listening, so thank you for putting in those emails. We'll make sure that we get a note of those. Now we're going to go to Tanisha Thompson at 122. Preschools and daycares would be a great start for younger families. I'm on the parent council at my daughter's school. The Highlander School was in the Jackson cluster and can share information and can absolutely share information. Thank you, Denisha. We got some more emails there from Virginia Chu. Now we're going to go to Elizabeth Wickland at 128. Can you circulate email/contacts list for the task force for each cluster? I'm on the task force, but there was no directions, guidelines about informing the community of the work. Should we do this as a cluster group in the task force? Ms. Wickland, I'll, first of all, we'll make note of that. Thank you. You don't need to feel a sense of responsibility to do that, but it sure would help for anybody on the task force to share this. Again, the more people we can get this, the more we can push the boundaries of exposure. And it looks like Travis also responded yes to that. Now we're going to go to Kelly Stewart. We're getting all your questions. We're at 139. Lisa Olmstead. I agree with this question and concern. I'm sorry to be so pointed, but there has to be a better communication plan about those of us who have heard about this to tell you who to email. Oh, Miss Lisa, totally agree. We are pushing the boundaries of exposure, but again, I'm glad that you were here today, and now that we have you on here, at least you won't miss this, and we'll make sure that you can get it. Gigi Hines, thank you for sending that. Corin at 151, thanks for your comment about the language about the comprehensive facilities master plan, everyday language. We see plenty of emails coming in here. Then Adrian at 143, this presentation needs to be presented at all the NPUs in Atlanta. And it looks like Travis has acknowledged that too. My husband is on the Go team at Pinkerton. We were never notified. It's too late to join. All right, Travis got that. Mia, we got your email. The meetings will also be publicized on Comcast Channel 22. That way everybody can knows where they're being publicized. Absolutely. We got some more emails. Also, please follow APS accounts. All of the social media accounts will be promoting this. Parents who have children currently enrolled should be receiving information via the contact information in Infinite Campus. So please be sure your contact information is updated in Infinite Campus. This is from Chief Dorna. We also have from Kiasha Copeland at 2 o'clock. How long are the meetings? Is it 1 hour, 2 hours, or until all questions have been acknowledged and or answered? And that is correct, Keisha. There's really no time limit. It's until all of the questions have been acknowledged or answered. Now we're going to 12:09. I don't remember any discussion. This is from Miss Lisa Olmsted. Don't remember any discussion about losing small school supplements in the budget. Is this something that has been mentioned in the past and I missed it? Tracy, did you get that?
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge that that small school supplements are there as long as the budget's available for them. And so, whether they exist or not in the future will be, again, that's a board decision. Again, it's something that we have to react to, in some ways. So I just want to be sure that, as part of that funding discussion is that, when you're talking about, budget shortfalls and, what are pathways for budget shortfalls, obviously the biggest, investment districts make are in the personnel, and to efficiently staff buildings is one way to make sure that without increasing class size, without, putting stress on facilities, how do you maintain a good budget? So we just want to be prepared in case that the budget says that those may not be available in the future, or there might not be as much funding for small schools in the future.
It is 12:18. We started right at 12 o'clock. We're going to get the last question that was just submitted at 2:08. It's from Miss Aaron, and I'm sorry, Miss Aaron, I'm not even going to try to pronounce your last name. I don't want to butcher it, but I will read your question, which is, could you please add the ideal class size to the data showing the ideal number of classes? This currently varies from school to school and leaves some questions around the school size being targeted.
Mhm. Well, we know that, the district has funded smaller class size in the past, and the results, they kind of look at results to see how much that's impacted. We just want to be sure that, currently at the elementary grade level, the targets sit somewhere between 20 and 23 kids per class at the elementary grade level. Again, those can be dependent on teacher contracts and making sure that we don't overpopulate rooms. And again, that's per class. It doesn't always necessarily mean that there's not a teacher's aide in the room. So there's a lot of definitions here, but really the target is, can we get that, 20 to 23? Again, some classes are going to have less than that. Some may have a few more, but kind of the tipping point is when, when another classroom or another staff has to be added into a classroom. So let's say you go above, let's say the maximum is 23 for elementary schools at a certain grade level, that the minute I hit 47 students, I have to have another staff member, right? And so, which means that my efficiency of teachers goes down from a full 23 per teacher down to, 47 divided by 3. So now I have 18 or, about 16 per classroom. And so, so we've got that you have to pay attention to. which will then drive, how many classrooms you actually need out there. At the middle school level, the high school level, they tend to increase those class sizes to like 28 to 30. And again, those do sound like a lot, but part of it is that how high schools work is that obviously, we talk about like every student has to take like English, ninth grade English. And so sometimes those classes are going to be a little bigger because you have to teach every student a class, but then you get like your AP calculus, AP math classes that only might have 10 or 12 in them. Depends on the enrollment at the school, but some still have 25 in them. And so it's a matter of trying to balance your enrollment at the middle grades and high schools to make sure. But what I do know is that I want to be sure that when we're looking at kind of the capacity of those buildings, especially at the middle and high school, if those numbers of those class size caps are 28 or 30, that a classroom size is big enough to accommodate that many kids. And so, because that can have a big impact on not only like the utilization number, but how crowded a school feels. And obviously, principals have a good feel for that, and they can communicate that back to us. So yeah, I do think that maybe getting a clear definition to make sure that how many students is a target for each grade level. We'll be clear on that, and as we move forward. So I appreciate that question.
I believe that's all. I don't see anything missing from the Q&A. There was one last comment submitted in the webinar chat from Ms. Lisa Olmsted, just mentioning Crystal, Travis, and Diane, and saying thanks for answering the questions you have been in the chat. And that was it. What we'll do is I will toss it over to Tracy to hit any last thoughts or comments, and then we will toss it over to Travis to see if there's anybody from the school system that we need to allow to make a comment, and then if not, Travis, you can close us out. But Tracy, it's all yours.
No, I just want to say thanks for all the questions. I know there's still a lot of questions out there, and continue to try to clarify this as much as we can through good communications. It is a lot and an overwhelming task. I know that. So thanks for the feedback today. Thanks for the frankness, and we want to continue that line of communication. So thanks for your time.
Thanks to Tracy and George for sticking with us for the past couple hours and getting through every question. And thanks to all of you for sticking around to the end. This will be recorded and posted, and we appreciate your engagement and look forward to seeing some of y'all back at it again this evening. All right, have a great day.